Today, I would like to teach you a new lesson from the vistas called as the enemy, which is a lesson which is extremely long, and therefore very often people do not actually pay attention to it. They just read a summary and they get rid of it. So it's not properly prepared. So I thought it's a good idea to make a video of the whole thing. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so the enemy is written by somebody who was famous for narrating uh, what do you call wartime stories and all that, and she's quite famous actually. Okay, so we'll deal with that a little later. Okay, so which is not really necessary at this stage. You just need to know the name of the person. That's all. So the enemy is a story of some concept connected with enmity. What is really enmity? Who is really an enemy? So, how does it start? Here it goes. Dr. Sadahoki's house was built on a spot of Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. So, Dr. Sadahoki's house was built on a spot off the Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. Okay, so that means this is a house that he had been living in right from the time of his birth, probably. Very old house he grew up in. The low square stone house. It's a low house. It's squarish in shape and it is made up of stone. Was set upon rocks, was founded upon rocks, was built upon rocks, well above a narrow beach that was outlined. It was the rocks were well above a narrow beach. The beach was very narrow. That was outlined. That is the outline of the beach, which was with bent pines, pine trees, which were bent probably towards the water. As a boy, he had often climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. His father had taken him to the islands of those seas. Now, the South Seas are very important here in this story because that's the place from which changes had taken place to most Japanese in those days. And never had he failed to say to the little boy, brave boy at his side, those islands yonder, do you see that those group of islands on the other side there? They are the stepping stones to the future of Japan. They are the stepping stones for the future, to the future for Japan. So if Japan had to go to the future, they need to use these southern islands as stepping stones. So it's a kind of ladder to a better future. What happens in the southern seas is they had a big harbor, and that's where everyone, in those days, this is during the Second World War or the First World War. I'm not exactly sure which one. During this war times, mostly there were no aircraft, and it was most that is passenger aircraft. There were probably fighter jets, but not passenger aircraft. So people had to go by ship. If they had to go abroad, they need to come to the southern seas. Okay, where shall we step from them? Sadhav had asked seriously. Who knows? His father had answered. Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it. So this seems very mysterious, but the boy never thought of it that way. Sadhav had taken this, what he said, into his mind as he did everything his father said. His father, who never joked, since his father never joked or played with him, so he didn't think it was either a joke or father playing with him. So he knew that it was something serious that his father was trying to say, but who spent infinite pains upon him who was his only son. He also made sure that he put as much effort as possible upon him who was his only son. Sada knew that his education was his father's chief concern, and Sada also knew very well that Sadav's father wanted Sadav to study. That was his main concern. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine, which means he had gone to study medicine to America. He had been sent at 22. He had come back at 30 before his father died. He had seen Sadav become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist. So by the time Sadav came back, his father was quite old, and by this time, in a few more years after that, Sadav slowly improved and he became famous in Japan as a surgeon, and also a scientist. Probably by the time he finished his studies, he had probably finished his PhD also, which makes him a scientist in the sense that he was doing research, right? Because he was perfecting a discovery as a result of his perfecting a discovery, because he was perfecting a discovery, he had made a discovery, he was perfecting this discovery, which would render, and this discovery was connected with something that would render or make wounds entirely clean, completely aseptic. He had not been sent abroad with the troops. So this was wartime, and this man was one of the only people who are not sent abroad along with the troops in order to fight the war. Also, he knew that there was some slight danger. Also, Sadav knew that there was a possibility that the old general might need an operation. And for this, he needed Sadav for a condition for which he was now being treated medically. And for this possibility, Sadav was being kept in Japan. Clouds were rising from the ocean now. You know what happens in certain days when there's a lot of sunshine, there is the land gets heated up a lot, and because land gets heated up a lot, there is hot air rising up, and there is a low pressure area created. And during night, what happens is there is a sea breeze starts coming from the sea, which is cold towards land. As it comes and meets the hot air of the land, it forms mist. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Sada watched mists hide outlines of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up to the beach below the house. So he saw that certain shapes that were there on the island near the edge of the shore was beginning to get covered up by this fog. And then this fog kept moving forward, creeping up to the beach below the house, wreathing around the pines, covering up the pines, surrounding the pines that's wreathing. In a few minutes, fog would be wrapped about the house too. In a few minutes, what will happen? The fog will completely surround the house too. Then he would go into the room. So this is his usual practice. He stands there to watch the fog coming in. When the fog finally, when there's nothing more to see outside, he would go into the house because of the fog. When there is nothing to see, he goes into the house to meet his wife, Hannah, where Hannah, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. But at this moment, the door opened. But before that, the door opened. She looked out. Hannah looked out. A dark blue woven hauri over her kimono. She was wearing a kimono, and on top of that, a dark blue woolen hauri. Hauri is probably like a sweater because it's made of wool here. And what is it? Actually, you see the footnote there, a loose outer garment worn over the kimono. Over her kimono, she came to him affectionately, put her arm through his. There was probably a gap between his arm and his torso. She put her arm through his, and he stood, smiled, and said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. He wanted to make sure that she was Japanese. She looked Japanese, but we wanted to make sure. So he didn't express his love for her. His father would never have received her. Okay, so suppose he had not blindly gone and whoever looks Japanese try to get married. When he comes back home, he'll have big trouble. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race, completely Japanese, no part of her non-Japanese. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, by chance, by accident, literally, at an American professor's house. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students. And the what do you call the professor and his wife were kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign. They only had few foreign students who are non-American, and they wanted to do something. Therefore, they asked them to come, maybe for dinner. And the students, though bored, most of the students were bored, had accepted this kindness. Sadhu had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house. Maybe he's not in the first year, and therefore he has already had an experience of being to Professor Harley's house. That's the name of the professor that night. The rooms that is in the house of Professor Harley The rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble, so talkative. So these were all discouraging for most of the foreign students visiting that house. But he had gone there and had found Hannah. Something made him go, and he found Hannah, a new student. And she happened to be a fresher and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. The moment he saw her, he thought he would fall in love with her, right? Now he felt her hand at this point in time when everybody has gone abroad for fighting in the war and he's now with his wife at home. He felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him, even though they had been married years enough to have two children. Although they had been married for many years by this time, now they have been married for so many years that they now have two children actually. Still, he feels that pleasure of a first time touch. For they had not married heedlessly in Japan. And the reason is because they had not been blind in their love and they had not fallen deeply in love as soon as they met, and then they had no restraint and all that. They had restraint, and because of that restraint, the love had been deepened, he feels. They had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan. And when father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. It was love at first sight, but they just talked to each other and made sure that they didn't do anything stupid, right? They're getting married at that time when they were supposed to be students. They completed their student ways and then they came back to Japan and then got married in a traditional Japanese way. Although Sadao had and Hannah had talked everything over beforehand. Although they had planned all this, that when they go home only they'll get married. They were perfectly happy. She laid her cheek against his arm. No, it looks like Sadao has got great regard for restraint in marriage, right? It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. While they were holding on to their arms, suddenly something black came out of the mists. It was a man. It was something moving. He was flung up out of the ocean, flung, it seemed, to his feet by a breaker. Breaker is a huge wave, okay, that crashes. He staggered a few steps. Looks like this wave had thrown him onto the shore, and because of the force, his body had been erected, and then he had moved a few steps because of the force of the flinging of the waves. He staggered a few steps, his body outlined, clearly seen against the mist, his arms above his head. Then the curled mists hid him again. Then the mists hid him again. Who is that? Hannah cried. She dropped Sadao's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees, crawling. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. A fisherman, perhaps, Sadao said, washed from his boat. He ran quickly down the steps, and behind him, Hannah came, her wide sleeves flying. The kimono has got hands, and otherwise called as sleeves, and this is called as sleeve. Okay, it's a full sleeve, and kimono has full sleeves, and it becomes broader near the wrist. Okay, so it was filling up with air as she ran towards the person who had fallen on his hands and knees and crawling. A fisherman, perhaps, washed from the. Okay, so now they. Okay, that's it. Okay, dropped his arm both. The man was on his hands and knees, not crawling. They saw him fall on his face and lie there. Fisherman, perhaps, washed from the shore. He ran quickly in steps behind him. Hannah came, her white sleeves flying a mile or two away on either side. There were fishing villages. But here, in this place, was only the bare and lonely coast. So this may not be a fisherman. It's a lonely coast. There are fishing villages which probably are on other islands a little far away, but this is not a place where fishermen come. It was a bare and lonely coast, dangerous with rocks, not a place for people to land. The surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. That is the narrow water, what you call shallow water of the waves is the surf. Beyond the beach was spiked. That is just below the surface of that shallow water. You find spiky rocks, right? Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. That is, those spikes might have torn him. They saw when they had come towards him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. That is his blood. He is wounded, Sadav exclaimed. He made haste to the man. He hurried up to the man, who lay motionless, his face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head, soaked with water, sea water. He was in wet rags of garments. Sadav stopped, Hannah at his side, and turned the man's head. They saw the face. A white man, Hannah whispered. Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away, and there was his wet yellow hair, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut, and upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him or they talked about him. Now Sadav remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers he began to search for it. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. On the right side of his lower back, Sadav saw that a gun wound had been reopened. That means there was a gun wound. It had got a scab on top, and now because of probably crawling through the what do you call the spiky